everyone. Thank you so much for joining me on another episode of Why I Love Flagler County, your local podcast spotlighting local businesses and local residents on what they love about being a part of Flagler County. So today I'm super excited to have my guest Matt with us today. Matt, thank you so much for the time today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. This is exciting. I'm so excited for you and all these podcasts that you've been doing to promote our area. So excited to
Yeah.
be part of it now, finally.
Well, thank you so much. Well, Matt, you do a really great service for people and you do a lot of education for people here in the area. And I'll let people kind of learn what that is in a moment.
Sure.
But also we're connected through the BNI here in town and you always
Yeah,
blow us away every week with your little commercial reminding us what you do. So
sure.
I'm super excited to have you on. You're doing a lot of great stuff. So I'll let you kind of
Awesome.
take it away and kind of introduce a
Sure.
little bit on what brought you to Palm Coast, what brought you to Flagler.
Yeah. So it was kind of an interesting story. Prior to moving down here, or being here, we were living just outside of New York City. So I came down, and it seems like that's about 90% of Palm Coast is somewhere from New York, New Jersey, that area. So we had relatives that moved down here, and they made the move, loved it. And when we checked it out and kind of took stock of the area and just kind of what the lifestyle was like, it was something that was attractive to us. So I think about a week ago, we actually realized it came up in like Facebook memories that it was like our first day down in Florida, like officially moved down here. So it's like 10 years, plus a couple of days ago we moved down. And so I always look at, in my business as a funeral director, sometimes you hear people that are, do different things. And I almost like kind of look at people's lives as like, different chapters of their lives, maybe, right? And so what was interesting was it's like this is my new chapters, being a Floridian. So I love it down here. I absolutely, we made the move, and I feel like every time I've moved, and my dad was in corporate America, so I feel like during my school, like grade school and high school years, I moved four times, three or four times. So it's just like this is a neat chapter for us to be in Florida. So,
That's
and I love it
awesome.
here. This is the only place in Florida that we've just been in Palm Coast the whole time.
It's a pretty nice, and I mean, if you've been here for about 10 years, like you said, I'm sure you've just seen Palm Coast completely change when you guys first moved
Absolutely.
here. It's
Oh
definitely
yeah,
not
for
the
sure.
same.
Yeah,
So
lots of growth. Yeah,
that's
absolutely.
cool. Is there any like specific moment where you're like, oh my gosh, um, like I'm so excited that this thing is now coming to Palm Coast?
Yeah. Um, Man, I don't know if there's anything that's come here that is super exciting. I will say this, what I love is I kind of love the sort of laid back feel of our area. But I think like if you think about where we are, like I tell people all the time, when they ask like, all right, well, where exactly are you in Florida? It's like, well, Jacksonville's an hour away, Orlando's maybe an hour and a half, Daytona's about 30 minutes. So there's like so much that if you can't find something that you love doing here, and I feel like a lot of what we have are great like outdoor things and whatnot, like we can travel not very far to get some really neat options. And so, I mean, I just think it's a great place because it's almost like a little, not that this is a hub, but there's so many neat things going to the beach or, whatever it is, I love it for sure.
Yeah. Oh yeah, it's really nice, and I think I like the aspect that, you do have to drive a little bit if you want to go to those like different activities.
Sure.
But then it kind of like separates it a little bit of there's not as
Yeah.
many people, random people just coming into town doing who knows
Yeah.
what.
Sure.
It's a little bit protected. I mean, for now, it's constantly growing and changing. So I might
Oh
eat my
yeah, for
words in
sure.
like 2 weeks, who knows?
Right. Right.
Um,
Yeah. Sure.
but I would love for you to talk a little bit about kind of your career with funeral planning, because
Sure.
I know it's one of those things that maybe people shy away from talking about, not like professionally, but in
Mhm.
life.
Yeah.
And they don't know a lot, but it's one of those things where you're always planning. So I'd love for you to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. And that planning is actually like part of what got me into it. So I agree with it. I mean, it's always a horrible topic. Like one of the things that I'm always aware of, when somebody walks into our door, it is rarely a happy moment for them. You know what I mean? And so it's just the sort of thing where, you have to be aware that these are tough conversations and they're often emotional too. As you start to talk to people about what they're doing, um, it triggers some really potentially powerful emotions. You know what I mean? So it's funny how I'll tell you just real quick how I got into the business you were asking. When I was up in northern New Jersey, the last thing that I did was I did financial planning and like insurance and investments. And so I and you had in like when people pre-plan for funerals, if they decide to also pre-fund it, the money typically is going into like an insurance contract. So I was insurance licensed, and that's really how, when I was looking at opportunities, I was looking, to kind of, bridge that gap and then come down and potentially do, financial stuff. And when there was the opportunity to a funeral home, it was kind of intriguing. And as I kind of thought through what that would look like, if you think about the funeral industry, I suppose you could say it's sort of recession proof. It's just there's always going to be a constant need. It's not like I'm trying to sell a widget or whatever where people can say, well, maybe I'll come back in 6 months and, work through that. And so I always loved helping people plan, when I was doing that up in New Jersey. And what I recognized once I found the opportunity here that first got me into the industry was that it really doesn't matter how much money you have or that sort of thing. Sometimes funerals maybe financially might feel tough or, be financially stressful, but everybody's going to pass away at some point. Everybody's going to have those same emotions. And it doesn't, I feel like when Steve Jobs passed away, like here's a guy that had just, an incredible amount of wealth and, died to me at a really young age. And it's like, it doesn't matter how much money you have. It's like you're going to still go through those same hard emotional times. And so I guess the way that I look at it, and I know you and I have kind of talked, outside of this, like, I'm active in my church, and I'm an elder at my church, for example. And I say that because I feel like I almost look at it as like a blessing to be able to kind of guide people through what they're going through. So, I do that, real time. I'm doing that when people experience a loss and I'm their funeral director. I also have, and this is like, where we interact in BNI and you hear me talk about different options people have. I started in the business doing the pre-planning, and I would say I feel like I'm good at helping guide people through that process as a funeral director, but I love the planning side of it because, like I feel like when people get done, with a planning session and they've kind of gone all the way through it, like I know I might not see them for years or decades, but when something happens, that they're going to be taken care of and that their family isn't going to feel stress at that time. It'll be emotional for sure, but that, I feel like, I've walked them as far through this as they would possibly want to go. And it can get super detailed, like if you've got somebody that really wants to sort of dive into the weeds. And I've had people pick out, Bible verses and music and that sort of thing when they do the planning and have their vision of, what they would hope, their family's experience would be during that process. But it's just so powerful to know, like, when they leave, they're not going to be scattering. They're not going to be taken advantage of. It's like we've got a plan, and it's kind of if you sit there and think God's got this, it's like, yep, your family's going to get this too. They've got it. So that's kind of a neat feeling to just feel like you've walked people through and really made a big difference. From that standpoint.
Yeah, of course. I think I don't know if I mentioned this to you, but when my grandma, when she passed, she had a plan. My grandpa had actually bought the plan for both of them. So they had
Yeah,
the same plot of land, and he bought it before
yeah,
he died, which was before I was born. To give
sure,
you some reference, it was, maybe 30 years ago. And then she
okay,
passed maybe 2 years ago, I think is what it was, or 3 years ago. I can't remember the math.
sure,
And we didn't have to do anything, right? We didn't have to go out and plan about what was going to happen within the next few days. All we really had to do was, just plan what day we were going to do it, and everything. And it's one of those things where you're going through such a tumultuous time, that, like
sure,
you mentioned, you don't want to get taken advantage of, you don't want, suddenly the prices are so much higher because people can tell you're in distress and you just want to get it done. It's like, wait a minute, that's not what we want. You don't have
Sure.
to think about all the options. It's just whatever makes it simple for you guys and your family. So I think that's really amazing what you're doing to help families with, it's a very uncomfortable topic to talk about, but it's one of those things where
Absolutely.
it's so much better to be planned way in advance and never have to think about it again rather than be like, "Oh, I'll die," not for a really long time. And then,
Sure.
God forbid something happens, you don't want your family to have to go through all of that for sure.
Absolutely. I mean, there's and really when you think about it, I mean, there's two components when people plan. One is that they've got their plan sort of squared away. And I always tell people, you're basically taking a snapshot of, what your wishes are now. And we were talking before we hopped on, like that, that can be a fluid thing. Sometimes people have a complete change in perspective, maybe in their final days or months, and they end up doing something maybe not vastly different, but different from what they may have initially thought they wanted. But that's okay. And it's at least there's a plan in place. The second thing too about pre-planning that I always just remind people of is like, when people come in and plan, one of the really neat things is they're locking the price in for anything that we control as a funeral home. So, that's a pretty powerful thing to be able to say, you want to do a cremation? Well, it's, this level of service would be this price. Or you want to do a burial? Like this is all, everything that you're doing from a funeral home standpoint is locked in. I mean, the only thing that I can't lock in are things that are maybe county-based fees that are applicable, or like, if somebody's planning a funeral service, well, I can't tell you that a certain amount of money is going to get you a certain size flower arrangement. I mean, just the cost will fluctuate based on whatever the costs are. But that's really powerful too, is, and I think sometimes people are surprised that they don't realize that there's that ability to lock their costs in for the rest of their lives.
Yeah.
And that's pretty neat to say, hey, if you want a cremation, they start at 995, and if you want to plan for that, well, you're going to get a chance to lock that in, as we get through this process. And that's, sometimes that's really, really powerful for people. So
Oh, definitely. And I think it's great that you mentioned that, things can change and people's wishes can change and you guys can reflect
absolutely.
that. Because I think sometimes when it comes to planning, we hold ourselves back on like, what if this thing about me changes, right? What if I
Yeah,
don't like this color anymore and I want to change it, but then I can't? And it's like, well,
sure.
it's like a very, it's not as big of a deal, guys.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think there are other factors that are more important at play, but it's great that you guys
Sure.
are able to adapt to that, and really
Yeah.
change and go with that flow so that people feel like,
Yeah.
oh, okay, it is worth it to
Yeah.
plan 20 years in advance.
Sure. And there's flexibility too. Like, one last thing about just that pre-planning is, for example, when people plan with us, the way I explain it to people is basically for as long as you live around this area and you want to work with us with this, the contract that we have, because it'll spell out, hey, Heritage is going to supply, all these things that you picked or whatnot, that you're locking in those prices for the rest of your life. But if you picked up and you moved clear across the country to, wherever, California or Chicago or New York, you're not going to lose the money that you started with me. You're just going to have to find a new place to basically take the money that's in your plan and then apply it somewhere else. So, and like that happens, if I'm planning for a couple, sometimes when the first of the two goes, sometimes they're the one that maybe is a little bit stronger, a little healthier, kind of maybe has their wits about them a little bit better. And all of a sudden, maybe there's a child that's in New Jersey that is now worried. I've got, mom or dad's still alive, but they maybe can't live on their own. And oh my gosh, I need to move them, back near me. Maybe they move in with me, or, maybe they're going to go to like an assisted living facility and move away. People I think sometimes wonder, well, just if I started a plan at a funeral home 20 years prior, am I just going to lose that money? And you don't. I mean, you just have to find somewhere new, to move it. And I think that gives people a lot of peace of mind, to do that. You can make payments, you can move it around, that sort of stuff. It's just different than when somebody passes away. It's like, we're going to kind of have to almost do a quick sort of fire drill, figure out what you want, and you're going to need to pay for it too. And that's where, sometimes just having that squared away, like you were talking about your grandma having that squared away, that when her time came, it was that much easier on the family. And it was just probably figuring out the final logistics and how quick could everybody get together to, you know, celebrate her life in a meaningful way. And that's really powerful at the end of the day. And that's kind of like what I was talking about before. Like when I get finished with people, I know that they're going to have a good plan in place. It can be flexible, but at least they're not going to be going through what I see so many families that come in that I'm helping as a funeral director, and they're hard conversations, and they haven't had them. They second guess themselves, or the other thing that certainly comes into play in our world is when there's a lot of cooks in the kitchen. If there's multiple kids or family members, the dynamics are tough sometimes. It's not. I always tell people death rarely brings out the best in people. It's emotional. It's really tough, and sometimes it's hard. I feel like there are some times where we're almost sort of acting almost like mediators too, and I don't mind actually being kind of tough. Like if somebody's being crabby or really going at it with their a sibling, for example, or something, I will literally speak up and say, listen, you're saying some things that I'm gonna hope maybe you'd regret saying, and like let's tone it down or cool off, or even at funeral services. It's really sometimes it's sort of shocking to see, how people behave, and it's tough. So like I said, kind of knowing often you can guide them through and try to make it, get through that process as unscathed as possible. It's fulfilling at the end of the day. You know what I mean?
Definitely. I mean, it sounds amazing, and you're doing, again, like I mentioned, a really great thing for people. And it's so funny whenever I think about my grandma. We lived in the same house as her, so I was with her for 18 years.
Nice. That's awesome.
And when she passed, I remember like 2 weeks before she passed, my family and I, we were all having a discussion, like, oh, what are we gonna do when she passes? And we're like, well, she's probably not gonna pass for maybe 3 more years, because she was healthy, she was strong, she was
Yeah.
always telling everyone her opinion on things, like she was
Sure.
fine.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and then literally 2.5, 3 weeks later, we were planning her funeral. And it's one of those
Yeah.
things that even though, she was, I think, 90 something, we
Yeah.
still hadn't even seen it
She
coming.
still seems so strong.
Yeah,
Yeah,
oh my gosh,
absolutely.
she was
Yeah.
moving
Yeah.
furniture. She's like, "I don't like where this
Oh my
chair is. I
gosh.
wanna move this." And we're like, "Grandma, wait for us." And she's like, "No, I wanna move it now." We're like, "No,
Yeah.
stop."
Right.
So,
Right.
yeah,
Oh
we were
my
like,
gosh. That's
"Yeah,
awesome.
it's fine."
Strong
So,
and driven, right? Yeah,
right.
that's awesome.
So it's one of those things that even though she was like 92, I think she was, we just still didn't see it coming, and it's still grateful that we had that plan in place, that
Yeah.
even this time that we knew was coming, but we didn't realize was coming, was really
Yeah.
taken off our hands. Because like you mentioned, death is I've seen a lot of things happen in different families, my family, other families, that death is not,
Sure.
um, a time to be making these decisions, but sometimes you have to, and it's just the way things are. But, hopefully
Yeah.
people learn a little bit more, and they see this and they go, "Wait, this is probably something I should start researching now." So Matt, I really
Sure.
appreciate you coming on and kinda educating the audience a
Absolutely.
little bit on different things that they can start looking out for now. And hopefully, I'll have all of your information and all heritage information in the description so people can click, copy, paste,
Love it.
check some things out a little bit easier. So, Matt, I really appreciate your time today. This was really great for me to learn. I appreciate it.
Sure. Thanks for having me, Macy. I appreciate it. Have a great day.
Of course, and to everyone watching, I really appreciate you as well, and I will see you next time.